Reclaiming Timeless Ways, episode number 56. Glad to have you along with us. Mike Traster, I'm Simon Fuller. As always, another topic of discussion that we hope will benefit you or somebody that you know. Right. Mike, today we're going to be talking about?
It's kind of an offshoot or an extension of what we talked about last time, which was redefining ourselves. So this is to deal with loss.
Okay. Something that we all will experience or have
experienced. We do. And some of it is slow and expected, some of it is fast. And I think when you hear people talk about either one, there's something mean about either kind, and there's also something kind about either type.
Yeah.
You know? So you have a long time to say goodbye to somebody if they have a 10-year illness.
Right.
You know? It's a long time to grieve, a long time to adapt,
right.
A long time to begin to redefine yourself and to really crystallize what you love and value about that person, to experience some gratitude. Does that mean that you won't grieve afterwards? No, it doesn't mean that.
Right.
You know, but it means that you've had a chance to deal with some of it.
Yeah. Yeah, pros and cons, I suppose, in a sense, both ways, which sounds maybe wrong, but you know, I guess you take away what you take away from it, and I guess you have no choice but to move forward with it. How do we move forward with it? You know, it was funny. I even chatted with you a couple times, Mike. I had a real good friend in his almost mid-40s. Yeah. Had it started off as just an infection, headaches. Long story short, it ended up being strep throat. It was on the backside of COVID. He had gotten healed, but I believe he thought that these were some of the symptoms. He didn't get checked out. Through a pinhole in a sinus, he gets a abscess on his brain that leaks in and basically poisons his spinal fluid and brain, and he's rendered unconscious. And after about a 6-month run of essentially being brain dead, he passes. You know, it's like. You know, what do you make of that, and how do you deal with that? And more so, he had a wife. Well, how does she deal with that? He has children. He had a mother still. How do they deal with that?
I think, I mean, you're making a statement, but I'm going to try to answer you in part.
Right.
Even, I won't say that. They didn't know enough.
Right.
To know what questions to ask.
Right.
So there needs to be forgiveness. You need to forgive your friend. It's like, what the hell was wrong with you is not an appropriate question to ask, right?
When I see the big guy one day, I might, thump him on the head. But I also can understand enough to say, how many times have I been him? Right. In a sense, maybe it didn't lead to death in his case. But how many times was I him in life? Plenty.
Real close.
Right.
You're not knowing how close you were.
Right.
So him and the people around him, it's like, okay, if you're an emergency room physician or somebody that deals with immunology or a family physician, you see that, and you should say, I think there's some things we must check out here.
Right.
Not maybe kind of, sort of, but since you're not trained,
right.
There's a lot of latitude for grace.
Right.
You say, you know what? It's completely normal and expected that you weren't forearmed with that information.
Right.
So there's no guilt.
Right.
It's like, oh God, did he screw up? We just didn't know.
Right.
Right. It's like that's a tragedy. That's not an outrage.
Right. And I feel like sometimes us on this end of it might beat ourselves up with some of those very questions, Mike, and I think it's easier said than done, but don't do that to yourself.
Absolutely.
But we don't get, when you say the word grace, oftentimes those that are left here on the living side don't give ourselves the grace. It's easier to say, well, Chris didn't know, but then I turn around and talk to his wife who said, well, we could have done this, whoa, this isn't your fault.
Right.
But it's easy to attach that. What could I have done different? Another one of his friends, he kept talking to me about these headaches. Well, yeah, but virtually everyone on this planet gets a headache at some point, right?
A number of years ago, somebody I was friends with kept telling me that she had a toothache.
Yeah.
I said, go to the dentist. And a couple weeks later, she had a massive heart attack and died, and that was her symptom. I'm not a doc. I was a nurse. I hear toothache, I think dentist. I'm not a dentist, but you should go see one.
Right.
And maybe a dentist could have referred her to an emergency room.
Right.
You know, geez, you don't have any obvious source of dental pain, but there is something called referred pain, right?
Right.
Well, you know, so I guess I could have extrapolated more, but she never followed through.
Right.
So how much should I beat myself up
Right.
for not being Mr. Wizard medically and seeing into the future? We don't see well into the future. We see way better in the past.
Right. Right.
You know, and so I think there's a lot of noise that goes on in our heads about remorse turning into, and when you're mourning, remorse can turn into self-condemnation.
Yeah.
And then you have to ask yourself that same question that we've mentioned a few times. What's the source of that thought?
Right.
Is that wind coming from a light place or a dark place? You know, what's the purpose of it? Now that I know, I'll do better next time because I got educated by this awful thing, this tragedy.
Right.
But does that mean that I'm bad because I didn't know?
Right.
Right? Would you want your child to grow up and feel that?
Right.
Would you want them to give themselves that burden
Right.
of self-condemnation
Right.
and then live with that? Well, if you wouldn't want it for them, why would you want it for yourself?
Yeah.
You know? So, you know, you identify the source and then you either embrace it as being light or you reject it and cast it out.
Right.
You know? And I think one of the things I've heard people in drug rehab wear a rubber band on their wrist. You ever heard about this?
Uh-uh.
And if they start thinking crap thoughts, they'll pull on the rubber band and snap it. And it snaps them out of a thought pattern. So it's like they associate that thought with a negative response.
I've heard of that sort of
Yeah.
psychology. I've never actually heard the rubber bands
Yeah.
piece of it, but
Yeah. So you know, an offshoot of that might be to say to yourself, no.
right.
Stop. No, don't do this. Stop. Look at something else. Redirect your attention.
Right.
You know, you got 100 stations on the radio, right?
Right.
Listen to KCAG.
That's right. You know, and it is true. We were talking about it before, and it's even gotten brought up in a Bible study. You know, when you're talking the dark thoughts, the wind that's blowing from the manure plant, not the potpourri plant, so to
Right.
speak. When that one's you're sniffing, you know, the things that we all fall short in some capacity somewhere.
Oh, absolutely.
That's not me pointing a finger at just you. It's me, it's Mike. We all have our things. And when we're trying to break those habits, oftentimes are when those thoughts will consume us greater. Because we're thinking about not doing whatever it is we want to change about ourselves.
Right.
The better alternative is to find something to focus on positive, and that's what you're saying. So maybe it is a different radio station. Thank you.
Right.
Maybe it's reading a book. Maybe it's going for a walk.
Yeah.
Maybe it's getting your pet and petting them, you know, your animal. Maybe it's calling a friend up on the phone. Don't think about not thinking about what you're trying not to think about, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Yeah.
That actually strengthens its hold on you.
Don't think about booze.
I can't have booze. I don't want booze. I'm not going to go drink booze. I mean, honestly,
Right.
it's
What are you reinforcing, right?
correct.
Right.
You've got to completely change that pattern by doing something different in that moment. Put your mind in the rubber bands. Ouch!
Right.
I've heard of that.
Right. Negative association.
Right.
When I think that, I get this pain in my wrist. Damn. So in high school, I was a terrible runner. And I got less terrible, and then I became mediocre, and then I became fair. And at some point over the next 20 years, I never became really good, but I kept improving. And sometime in my late 30s, my knees were done. And I remember I was running every day, and then every day and a half for 2 days, every two and a half days, every 3, every 4. And then I was hobbling for 4 days, and it was like, oh, I love running. But this isn't good for me, you know. And that was hard to deal with because I had run thousands and thousands of miles. Loved it. It was just a joy for me. It was a meditation, you know. And I had to stop. So I did some bicycling, did some walking, you know. It's not the same.
Right.
But the question is it's not the same, where do I go with that?
Right.
You know, how much am I going to pour that into pitying myself and being bitter and saying, well, now life sucks because that was the only thing that could ever be okay. Right.
I'm not going to like anything as much as I liked that. Maybe so, like you say, grieve, allow yourself to, give yourself grace. But I like that question. What are you going to do with that?
Right.
That is real. That is negative. That is a loss.
Right.
Or somebody passes away, or you lose a job, or all that. What are you going to do with that?
Right. So that's the time to change idea. And then sudden is a shock,
Yeah.
you know. I remember I got a note from a friend's wife once. Oh, Michael was sick and he was out on the road. We didn't know how sick he was, and then he died. And I'm like, wow. It was like I got hit in the head with a sledgehammer. It was a mean note, you know. It was insensitive, just crazy. And when I spoke to her years later, she was angry at him because aside from her inheriting this mansion that she had bought with him, mostly his money, she was very angry because he had never put her on a life insurance policy. And she wasn't counting what he did. She was only counting what he didn't do. Mm-hmm. And no, oh, he gave me this, and that, just he didn't give me this. And I was like, I'm not sure how much she cared about him. You know? Did she value him or just the stuff?
Yeah.
Was it entertaining but not really deep, you know? So adapting, grieving. Are you allowed to be mad at somebody who's dead?
You know, I think, yeah.
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 I mean, it's interesting because in that exact same scenario story I told earlier, there was some things, and I'm not getting in their personal world, that weren't perfect.
Right.
Relationship.
Not like me or you.
That's right. Right. Yeah, we're just, look at the halos.
Want to
You know,
watch me levitate?
probably can't see us, the gleam and the glow, the shimmer and the sheen. But things weren't necessarily so hot down the stretch. And when he then got sick, and I was friends with both of them, and all of a sudden there's extra anger at him, for some of the habits that maybe partially led to this.
Right.
B, for some of the things that then weren't taking place or weren't lined up for her to, that now she has to deal with, and then C, she was angry at herself for being angry at him. Mm-hmm. Right. And that was a real interesting set of emotions. Meanwhile, sad, mourning, still loved him. There was just a whole plethora of emotions, but it did, at times, there was real anger. And I think there's a healthy level of anger we can have. You've got to sort through that. Now, you don't get stuck in that state. You shouldn't get stuck in that state of anger, but you certainly have a right to be angry.
You can always acknowledge that they did some wrong thing or things.
Right.
And that was never okay, and it never will be.
Right.
So that part of their decision-making process you will never accept.
Correct.
But that doesn't preclude you from having cared about them deeply,
Correct.
you know, as a friend, you know,
Absolutely.
loving them as a friend, valuing them. So the image that I have, the guilt message goes like this: so-and-so died, so somebody, now this is a brutal image. It's like a cartoon, right? So-and-so died, so somebody goes into the funeral parlor and starts hitting them, right? When they're defenseless.
Right.
But that's not what's happening. What's happening is they're telling the truth.
Right.
They're speaking a part of the truth that's generally forbidden. Oh, we don't speak that way about the dead. Who is we?
Right.
Who are you? Right? You speak for everyone?
Yeah.
Are you sure that your pronouncement is proper?
Right.
Or is it just habitual?
Right.
Right? If we suppress somebody and shut them down and we forbid them from expressing a necessary truth, something that hurt them, are we multiplying their injury? Because they've already been quiet for too long, right? Or are we going to say, you know what, I loved Bobby or Billy or whoever too, and it must have been difficult to love that person and also live with the nonsense that they pulled, right? So you can do both.
Right.
So you're not beating up the dead. You're beating up the decision.
Right.
And you're being open. You're saying, hey, this is part of my journey. This is part of what I went through. This is why I look like crap. Because I'm beat up, you know. I had to clean up their mess, you know, whatever it was that their mess was. And so it's okay to experience anger with somebody who's passed.
Yeah.
I don't think it's okay to live only there.
Right.
Then that's your whole purpose in life. That's your identity. And that's the well that you fall into that you can't get out of because you won't get out. If that's the identity you want, you'll have it, and you will not be happy soul.
Right.
You know. So yes, both. If you think about, again, we get back to the radio, right? And this gets back to like the NLP kind of thinking, neurolinguistics. Where do I tune my radio? This radio. What station am I listening to? Am I listening to something vulgar, talking about murder and rape and glorifying that? Am I obsessing about that? Or am I going, oh, wait a minute. Yeah, those are real things, but how much of my time do I want to feed that to my own brain?
Right.
I think I need to either turn the radio off, unplug it, or turn it to KCHE. He didn't pay me to do this. I'll probably do it
Find
again.
us in the App Store.
What's
Yeah,
that?
find us in the App Store. No. No, and you're right, Mike, and we've talked about this off
It's not
show
on
before.
the cup, or I'd show it
There
to you.
is, there's an old adage in the world of news media, if it bleeds, it leads. And albeit, yes, there are some real crap things happening in the world, and I'm not going to try to completely take us off a tangent, but they do relate to loss, and they do bring up some real questions. But what I would say is there's also good things happening, and how often do we hear those? And at the end of the day, when you're saying tune that radio station, literally and figuratively speaking, we get to decide. We heard it, we can't unhear it, but is that all I'm going to allow myself to hear? And therefore, after enough of it, with enough repetition, I'm going to believe that's all there is.
Right.
And I'm going to live in that world.
Emotionally, you will believe that because
Right.
you've experienced it to the point where you're super saturated with it, and everything else is pushed out of your
Right.
gut view.
Right.
In your gut, that's all you experience.
Right.
So that becomes your world.
Right.
Right? I was talking to a guy the other day. He had a beautiful pickup truck, big expense, probably $60,000 truck. And we were talking, he told me he had a fleet of 6 or 7 or 8 of them. Well, I guess, I don't know what his business was. So I started mentioning some automotive products to him that might save him a fortune over 10 years.
Right.
You know? Didn't cost me anything to tell him. And I said, the first thing is, look, I'm not involved with any of these businesses or this business, these products.
My motive is not making profit.
Right. I'm not selling
Right.
anything, right? I do use them occasionally. I get nothing other than an engine that doesn't blow up, right? Which is a good thing.
Right.
I said, so maybe over a decade, this might save you 50 or 100 grand.
Right.
Would you like to keep that money?
Right.
Would you like to have a 500,000 mile engine instead of a 200,000 mile?
Right.
Oh, really? Seriously? Here, go check this out, you know? And you can see it for yourself. So I helped him find a radio station that he didn't know existed,
Yeah.
you know? And why not? So loss, crime, accident, somebody gets, ripped off, they lose something of value, or they have an accident, they get hurt, like my accident, you know. A legitimate desire for justice. If you start preaching at somebody for forgiveness and they never got justice, you're compounding their injury. It's like you're putting sandpaper on their scar. Leave them alone. Leave them, or tell them, look, you know what? You have a legitimate cause to be morally outraged. You have been wronged. You have been outrageously and deeply wronged. And I think you'll always feel that hunger. And they're going to be shocked because everybody else is going, oh no, you're the villain now. You should be let them deal with them in their own. It's like you might say very gently, you have every right to be enraged, as long as you understand that too much rage will injure you.
Right.
Right. How do you get your justice? How do you get their ass kicked in the system in some systemically legit, regardless of what you want? Right. How do you get it done properly but not get consumed by your rage?
I'm not asking you to not be outraged.
Right.
I just genuinely care about your well-being, and I'm nervous for your, or looking out for your health.
So we need maybe your
The
mind.
balance there.
Maybe if I'm 90% in moral indignation and outrage, I've only got 10% of my mind left for other things. What if I shrink that to 75?
Right.
That's still a lot.
Right.
But now I've got 25% where I can go into my field of dreams, let's say, and be happy for a little bit.
Right.
Give myself a break, a vacation. So I don't become my other mugger, or whatever it was that happened. So the idea that preaching to somebody, wagging your finger in their face about forgiveness, no. Let them go through what they need to go through and really figure out they might have a completely, not only justifiable, but necessary anger, And so maybe the person that's wagging their finger at them should shut up. Leave them the hell alone. Or give them encouragement. I might know somebody who can help you find a good lawyer. Maybe you'll get some justice, But we don't see that. That should happen more. Let me help you find a resource, right?
That's a wrap, huh?
That's a wrap.
All right. Well, some good conversation as we all experience loss, and maybe we're able to take away something that can help you or somebody you know in there. So thank you, Mike, for sharing. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Reclaiming Timeless Ways. Until we see you next time, we hope you have a wonderful day.